Thank you for coming. So, as Josh said, I'm Sam Guckenheimer. Just to be a little more specific, I work on Visual Studio Team Services, and which is the SaaS version of what you might know as the on-prem Team Foundation server, and other cloud services that are related, like Application Insights. We've been doing DevOps for a few years. I've talked about this a lot. I'll start with a show of hands. How many of you at home have locks on your doors? Okay, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Now, do you also trust those locks enough that you leave piles of cash and passports and credit cards out on your desk? Okay. That's the theme of this talk. There's a mindset shift to a new normal, which is that it's not good enough to just protect the perimeter. You need to assume breach. Essentially, the current attackers are persistent, they're sophisticated, they do good reconnaissance. They'll take many, many months to spot their targets. They will find ways in, and they will use very sophisticated small steps to move inside your network. So no matter how good your perimeter security is, you have to assume breach. That's what we do. And we do that to test our assumptions. And the way we do that is by playing security war games. We do red teams against blue teams. It's a double-blind test where red teams are attackers, blue teams are defenders. The test is run not in a lab, not in a pre-prod environment, but in production. There are rules of engagement. You can't compromise the customer SLA. You can't actually exfiltrate data. You can't actually damage the database or bring down the service. But as the red team, you prove that you can get right to that point. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the principles we apply, and then I will give you examples from some of our retrospectives on what we have done inside in order to do this. Okay. Again, from my team, from Visual Studio Team Services, okay? And so we run these things. There are these exercises. There's, of necessity, a referee who sits above them, and you'll see why in some of the examples. And the goal here is to make the blue team stronger so that we can defend against a real attack, and we can do so with better MTTR. Okay, so you want to exercise your ability to respond. You want to detect faster. You want to recover faster. So you run scenarios that deal with service compromise. You deal with inside attacks. You deal with remote code execution, malware, you put in backdoors, you put in C2 servers, you do everything that real attackers do in modern attacks. And the red team continually studies modern attacks and the most sophisticated attacks and says, can we do that here? So red team takes these real world attacks, and they look at these as emerging threats. They think about things like lateral movement. They look at how they can exfiltrate data. They think about how they can evade detection. They pride themselves on their mean time to compromise or their mean time to pwnage. In other words, bring down the service. They highlight what the gaps are in security monitoring and the gaps in recovery. And out of that, hopefully we improve our own response. And this, in turn, creates a cycle of demonstrating the need for assuming breach, makes the business risks clear, and shows what we need to do to get better. The blue team, on the other hand, is trying to detect and respond. So their goal is find indicators of compromise, find them quickly, respond and recover to the attack, and practice the incident response. This is like, disaster recovery. Unless you practice, unless you do it, you're not going to be able to do it for real. This produces practical, actionable intelligence. It gives you full visibility into the real conditions within the real production environment. That's where we're doing this. And it gives you an understanding of what data analysis and forensics you need to do for real in a real attack. So you've got accurate assessment. You know where you need to invest to get better. You know what, both in terms of process and in terms of tools. And your goal is to minimize the impact in the event of a real breach and to harden yourselves internally against what happens when you are breached. So it's a cycle. The war game exercises have red teams who do insider attacks. The blue teams are trying to stem the breaches, and they're monitoring, and everyone's monitoring emerging threats, and then we do new exercises and what have you, and repeat these on a cadence. And how much happens depends a little bit on which team you're on. The larger teams at Microsoft, like Office 365, Azure, what have you, are doing this continuously with standing red teams. Others do this less frequently and will borrow red teams, but we're all doing it in the services world. So let's look at some real examples from some real retrospectives we've done on real exercises in Visual Studio Team Services. Okay. Unprotected file shares on the network. What do they look like? Well, you give everyone permissions to a machine. Happens a lot. Someone just sets up a machine. And of course, that's not a problem because it's just internal. It's just QA. It's just test. And that's why we have a file on it called passwords.txt. Indeed, that's what we found. And we found this, we found things like this scattered around people's own workstations and then on unprotected file shares. Multiple administrators on laptops. And one of the next things to do that we found is we would scan for what are the machines around on CorpNet, on our internal network, identify the admins on those machines, and frequently there would be an admin account on a machine which was not a real user, but one of these internal accounts, so that you could easily recover it. And that's a backdoor in which an attacker can use. So you can jump on the machine using one of these accounts, and that lets you install malware. And the malware lets you steal real passwords. Of course, this is something you can get off. You can get your favorite stuff off GitHub to do this. If they're still running Windows 7 or Windows 8. Windows 10 fortunately blocks this. Now, then you can use those passwords that you've just captured in clear text, or you can steal the hash to move laterally and jump across domains, because there are trust relationships across the domains internally. And that was a time, until fairly recently, when we just let you move across domains without multi-factor authentication inside the company network. So it was fascinating to find the number of incidents of this. And then we discover, a bunch of folks involved in service delivery would reuse passwords across domains. So my password on the corporate domain, which had been compromised, would actually get someone who'd stolen my account into production. I don't actually have access to production. So if you want to steal my account, it won't get you very far. Now, great way to get these things, of course, is with social engineering, which has become pretty sophisticated. So we've tried a bunch of phishing attacks on ourselves. Now, it's interesting. We have to take annual training, which includes anti-phishing training. And you would think Microsoft employees would be pretty sophisticated about phishing. Well, we've tried various forms of this. One was, hey, join this beta for a new model phone, which model didn't exist. And this mail was from a suspicious origin, if you looked at the actual sender. But we actually got 220 out of 524 people to click the sign up button and get themselves compromised or potentially compromised. Another great social engineering experiment was a mail displaying as though it had been sent from one of the development managers, saying, please take a look at this bug. The subject line, new query 3. And it was all a cooked mail, and said, please check this out. And that took you to a login page to get to the production repo. This was when we were still doing single-factor authentication. And attackers made a replica of what was then the corporate login page. But if you looked closely, you could see that the URL was not actually a real URL. It was just a website they'd set up. And you type in your credentials and your password and sign in, and you'd get a message that would say, you just compromised your account. So another great way to phish identity. Now, this is a big deal for us because, in fact, we have a bunch of suppliers who do federated identity with us, like this, like, healthcare and benefits and, 401k, stuff like that. So this is really an issue. It's less of an issue as we've gone to multi-factor authentication. One of the things that we've also done, this is a footnote, is we let you now do single-click phish reporting out of the Office 365 email system. So you can report any mail that you get as suspicious and say, I don't trust this, and it will get an investigation. Those are examples of attack techniques that have been done. There are many more, which I won't have time for. Let's look at some defense examples from the blue team going against these. So the reason we do all these attacks on ourselves internally again is so that we can get better at defense. Okay. And the blue team comes out of our own service reliability team. Okay. Now, unlike the red team, which is concentrated, the blue team is worldwide. We're running a 24/7 by 365 service. No downtime. They're spread across 5 time zones. So they have a Yammer group for communication. Could be Slack, could be whatever. And during this exercise, they also have a referee to communicate with. So they can say, hey, we found these indicators of compromise. Is this red team we're finding, or these external intruders? And sure enough, in this example, these were, I mean, you don't need to read the details. This is how they identified, you're spotting things that the red team's leaving behind. So that's the need for the referee to communicate. They would map topology of the attack. Now, these big red arrows, each of these big red arrows is a jump, a lateral movement across domains. So they're tracking as the attackers are moving from outside into the CorpNet, and then into internal networks, and then across, and finally in the bottom into production, and then homing out. And they're building up this topology of how are we getting penetrated and doing reconnaissance on the attack while it's in progress. And they're discovering that the attackers are putting in place command and control servers as backdoors that are being used in turn to ping out and to being used as a means by which they can exfiltrate data from inside the network. So those are examples of what the blue team is discovering during the exercise, things we need to not allow real attackers to do. So what are some of the learnings we get out of this retrospective? Well, one is not to give people administrative credentials, to just do just-in-time administration. PowerShell, for example, now has something called just enough admin. So you can do, admin rights scoped and for 4 hours. Multi-factor auth everywhere, including across internal domains. Secrets management with rotation diligently. Azure makes this pretty easy. There's something called Key Vault. Amazon has something similar. Using latest OS versions and patches. I'm sure you do this. Windows 10 blocks most of the malware. Using the DevOps release pipeline, as Nate was up here discussing, lets you flush continually so that you can destroy compromised instances, you can deploy a containment and fix, and you don't have to show your hand to the attacker. So this is just part of normal business. You're not showing, there's someone lurking on that server, and so we have to do something specific on that server. The redeployment's just part of what you do. Segregate your domains. Do not dual home servers. So in other words, don't let a server connect to 2 domains, because that's a vulnerability. If they get in from one domain, they can hop over to the other. And use different passwords on different domains. Don't use open file shares, and in particular, don't put passwords on them. Only you should be the administrator on your laptop, as we showed. And don't get caught by phishing. Don't click on the links. Be careful. Now, someone this morning said 50% of us will be nose-to-nose with malicious phishing this year. I certainly believe that. It's unbelievable how sophisticated those attacks are getting. So, in conclusion, the goal is use the war games to establish a security baseline on your time to detect, your time to contain, your time to fix, your time to recover. Use this as a framework so you can inventory damage and so that you can get better. If you're still measuring your ability to recover in calendar increments rather than clock increments, you have a lot of opportunity to improve. I think that's all I have time for. Thank you very much.